What does it mean to love someone when everything you thought defined them, and yourself, turns out to be something else entirely? The rhythmic clatter of the subway train was a comforting constant in Ademola's life. Every morning, he would board the same car, take the same seat by the window, and let the hum of the tracks lull him into a sense of routine. It wasn't just habit. It was his sanctuary, a brief escape from the chaos of being an international student in London. But one day something, or rather someone, disrupted that calm. Her name was Jabari. She had started appearing across from him weeks ago, always sitting in the same spot as though she too craved familiarity. At first, Ademola didn't pay much attention. People came and went on public transport all the time. But Jabari was different. Her presence seemed to fill the entire carriage with warmth, even when she sat quietly reading or scrolling through her phone. There was something magnetic about her. A radiant smile, eyes that sparkled like sunlight dancing on water, and an aura of effortless grace. Ademola couldn't help but notice how effortlessly beautiful she was. He tried not to stare, but it was impossible. She looked like she belonged on magazine covers, not squeezed into a crowded subway seat. Yet there she was, every single morning, mirroring his own ritualistic behavior. And then, one fateful Monday, curiosity got the better of him. "Why do you always sit here?" he blurted out before he could stop himself. Jabari looked up from her book, startled for a moment, then smiled. "Why do you?" she countered playfully. "I like my routine," Ademola admitted sheepishly. "So do I," she replied, her voice soft yet confident. That simple exchange marked the beginning of their friendship. What started as small talk blossomed into conversations about school, music, dreams, and fears. They began meeting outside the confines of the subway, grabbing coffee after class, exploring London together, and eventually attending parties where laughter flowed as freely as the drinks. For Ademola, these moments felt surreal. How could someone so extraordinary be interested in spending time with him? But beneath the surface of their growing bond lay questions neither dared to ask. Questions about identity, attraction, and love itself. Little did Ademola know, those unspoken truths would soon unravel everything he thought he knew, not only about Jabari but also about himself. Friendship is the soil where love often takes root. But what happens when the roots grow deeper than expected? Over the next few weeks, Ademola and Jabari became inseparable. Their daily subway rides turned into shared meals at cozy cafes near campus, late-night study sessions in the library, and spontaneous adventures exploring London's hidden gems. Each interaction deepened their connection, weaving threads of trust and affection between them. For Ademola, these moments felt like stepping into a dream. He had never met anyone quite like Jabari, someone who could make him laugh until his sides hurt, challenge his perspectives, and still feel utterly comfortable in silence. Yet, there were subtle signs that puzzled him. Jabari avoided physical contact beyond casual gestures, a light touch on the arm or an occasional hug. When they went dancing at clubs, she always kept a certain distance, her movements graceful but restrained. At first, Ademola dismissed it as shyness or personal boundaries. After all, everyone had quirks, right? But something about her behavior gnawed at the edges of his mind, though he couldn't pinpoint why. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of classes, Jabari suggested they visit Hyde Park before heading home. The sun was setting, casting golden hues over the sprawling greenery. They walked side by side along the Serpentine, the cool breeze ruffling their hair. "You seem distracted lately," Jabari said suddenly, breaking the peaceful quiet. Ademola hesitated. "I guess I've just been thinking about life, you know? About us," she pressed gently, her gaze steady. He blinked, caught off guard. "Yes." She smiled softly. "We're friends, Mola, but sometimes I wonder if we could be more." Her words hit him like a tidal wave. Was she saying what he thought she was saying? His heart raced, torn between excitement and panic. Friends didn't usually confess feelings like this, not without risking everything. I don't know what to say," he stammered finally. "That's okay," Jabari replied, her voice warm but tinged with vulnerability. "You don't have to decide now. Just think about it." The rest of the walk passed in a blur. Ademola replayed her words over and over in his mind, each repetition stirring emotions he wasn't ready to confront. Could he see Jabari as more than a friend? Did he want to take that leap? And why did the idea both thrill and terrify him? By the time they reached the train station, Ademola's thoughts were a tangled mess. As they parted ways, Jabari leaned in and kissed him lightly on the cheek, a gesture so fleeting it might have been imagined. Yet the warmth lingered long after she disappeared into the crowd. That night, lying awake in bed, Ademola stared at the ceiling, wrestling with questions he couldn't answer. What did Jabari truly mean to him? And what did he truly want? One thing was certain: their friendship had shifted irrevocably, opening doors to possibilities neither of them could ignore. Sometimes, celebrations reveal truths we aren't prepared to face. A week later, Jabari invited Ademola to her birthday party. It's nothing fancy, she assured him during one of their subway rides. Just a few close friends. You'll come, won't you? Ademola hesitated. Social gatherings weren't exactly his forte, especially not ones involving people he barely knew. But how could he refuse? This was Jabari, the girl who had become his anchor in a foreign city, the person who understood him better than anyone else. If she wanted him there, he owed it to her to show up. The evening of the party arrived sooner than he anticipated. Jabari's apartment was modest but inviting, decorated with twinkling fairy lights and balloons. Music played softly in the background as guests mingled, laughter filling the air. Ademola recognized a couple of classmates but mostly found himself surrounded by strangers. Still, Jabari introduced him warmly to everyone, her pride evident as she referred to him as her best friend. As the night wore on, Ademola found himself relaxing. He sipped soda, he rarely drank alcohol, and joined conversations about everything from Nigerian cuisine to South African politics. For once, he didn't feel like an outsider looking in. He belonged here, among these people who clearly adored Jabari as much as he did. But then, midway through the party, something strange happened. Another guest, a tall, striking woman named Amara, approached Jabari and pulled her aside. From across the room, Ademola watched as they exchanged hushed words, their body language tense. Whatever they were discussing seemed serious. Jabari's usual cheerfulness dimmed slightly before she forced a smile and returned to the group. Curiosity burned within him, but he didn't dare ask. Instead, he focused on enjoying the rest of the evening. Later, as the clock ticked past midnight and the other guests began leaving, Jabari insisted on walking Ademola to the train station. The streets were quiet, bathed in the soft glow of streetlights. They walked close together, shoulders brushing occasionally. Ademola wanted to bring up what he'd witnessed earlier but decided against it. Tonight wasn't the time for heavy topics. At the station, Jabari surprised him again. Leaning in, she kissed him softly on the cheek. A deliberate act this time, lingering just long enough to leave him breathless. "Thank you for coming tonight, Mola," she whispered. It meant a lot. And just like that, she was gone, disappearing into the night as the train whisked him away. Back in his dorm room, Ademola replayed the moment endlessly in his mind. That kiss, it hadn't been platonic. Or had it? Either way, it left him yearning for answers he wasn't sure he was ready to seek. A kiss can be a question, an answer, or both. But what happens when the meaning is unclear? The days following Jabari's birthday party were a blur of confusion for Ademola. That fleeting kiss at the train station replayed in his mind like a broken record, each iteration stirring emotions he struggled to untangle. Was it merely a gesture of gratitude? Or had it been something more, a hint of romantic interest? He couldn't shake the feeling that Jabari was testing the waters, gauging his reaction without committing fully. Their subway rides resumed as usual, but there was an unspoken tension now, a crackling energy between them that neither acknowledged. Ademola wanted to ask her about the kiss, to demand clarity, but every time he opened his mouth, the words died on his lips. What if she laughed it off? Worse still, what if she confirmed his suspicions and he wasn't ready to handle the implications? Jabari, for her part, acted as though nothing had changed. She chatted animatedly about her classes, shared funny anecdotes from her weekend outings, and even teased him about his obsession with routine. Yet beneath her cheerful demeanor, Ademola sensed hesitation, an uncertainty mirroring his own. One afternoon, as they walked back from university together, Jabari suddenly stopped mid-sentence. Turning to face him, she said, "Mola, you've been quiet lately. Is everything okay?" Ademola froze, caught off guard by her directness. He fumbled for words, his cheeks flushing. "It's just the other night at your party." She tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "What about it?" "That kiss," he blurted out before he could stop himself. Did it mean anything? Or was it just friendly? For a moment, Jabari didn't respond. Her gaze dropped to the ground, and Ademola braced himself for rejection, or worse, indifference. But when she looked up again, her eyes were soft, almost vulnerable. "It meant something," she admitted quietly. "But I didn't want to scare you off. You're important to me, Mola. More than you realize." Her confession sent a jolt through him. Important. Did she mean romantically? Platonically? He couldn't tell, and her cryptic phrasing only deepened his frustration. "I need time to process this," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how I feel yet." To his relief, Jabari nodded understandingly. "Take all the time you need," she replied. "Just promise me one thing." "What's that?" "Don't push me away because you're scared. Whatever happens, I want us to stay honest with each other." Her words lingered long after their conversation ended. That night, lying in bed, Ademola stared at the ceiling, grappling with the weight of her request. Honesty sounded simple enough in theory, but in practice, it felt like navigating a minefield. How could he be truthful about his feelings when he wasn't even sure what they were? Sometimes, alcohol loosens tongues and reveals secrets. A few weeks later, Jabari invited Ademola to another party hosted by Amara, the same woman whose tense exchange with Jabari had puzzled him earlier. This time, however, the atmosphere was livelier, with pulsating music and laughter echoing through the apartment. Ademola hesitated at first. He wasn't much of a drinker, but Jabari encouraged him to try just one cocktail. Reluctantly, he agreed, figuring it might help ease his nerves. As the evening wore on, Ademola found himself surprisingly relaxed. The drinks flowed freely, and soon he was chatting animatedly with strangers, laughing at jokes he wouldn't normally find funny. For once, he felt carefree, unburdened by the weight of unanswered questions. Jabari, too, seemed different tonight. More uninhibited, less guarded. She danced with abandon, her movements fluid and confident. Watching her, Ademola felt a pang of admiration mixed with longing. She was breathtaking, radiant in a way that made his chest ache. But as the hours passed, Jabari began showing signs of intoxication. Her steps grew wobbly, her speech slurred. Concerned, Ademola approached her. "Hey, are you okay?" he asked, steadying her as she swayed slightly. "I'm fine," she insisted, giggling. "Just having fun." Despite her protests, Ademola knew better. "Come on, let's get you home," he said firmly. He helped her navigate the crowded apartment and flagged down a taxi outside. Once inside, Jabari leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. "You're such a good friend, Mola," she murmured drowsily. Friend. The word stung, though he told himself it shouldn't. Weren't they still figuring things out? When they arrived at her building, Ademola escorted her upstairs, ensuring she got safely into her flat. As he turned to leave, she grabbed his arm, pulling him close. Before he could react, she kissed him. A real kiss this time, full of heat and intensity. Stunned, Ademola froze. When she pulled back, her eyes searched his face, seeking some kind of confirmation. Unable to resist, he kissed her again. His doubts momentarily drowned out by desire. It wasn't until he returned to his dorm that reality crashed down on him. What had he done? Had he crossed a line he couldn't uncross? And what did this mean for their relationship? Actions in the heat of the moment can feel like stepping into uncharted territory. Ademola woke up the next morning with a pounding headache and a sinking feeling in his stomach. Bits and pieces of the previous night came rushing back. The party, the drinks, Jabari's kiss. It wasn't just one kiss. It was two. Two deliberate, passionate kisses that left no room for ambiguity. But what did they mean? Was this a drunken mistake on her part? Or was it something more? He replayed the scene over and over in his mind, dissecting every detail. She had initiated it twice. That had to count for something, right? Yet doubt gnawed at him. Had she been too intoxicated to know what she was doing? And if she remembered everything today, how would she react? Would she regret it? Worse still, would she pretend it never happened? Unable to focus on anything else, Ademola skipped breakfast and headed straight to class. He couldn't concentrate during lectures, his thoughts consumed by Jabari. When the clock finally struck noon, signaling the end of the session, he practically bolted out of the lecture hall, hoping to catch her before she disappeared. To his relief, Jabari was waiting for him outside the building, leaning casually against a lamppost. Her expression was calm, almost serene, as though nothing unusual had transpired between them. For a brief moment, Ademola wondered if she truly didn't remember, or worse, if she intended to brush it off. "Hey," she greeted him warmly, pushing off the post as he approached. "Hey," he replied awkwardly, shuffling his feet. "Listen, about last night." She held up a hand, cutting him off. "I remember," she said simply. "And I meant it." Her words hit him like a freight train. Meant it. What exactly did that mean? Before he could ask, she continued, "I've been wanting to tell you how I feel for a while now, but I didn't want to scare you away. Last night felt like the right time." Ademola's heart raced. "So, does this mean we're—" Jabari smiled softly, her eyes locking onto his. "If you want us to be." The simplicity of her response took his breath away. Here she was, laying her feelings bare, giving him the choice without pressuring him. It was terrifying and exhilarating, all at once. "I need some time to think," he admitted finally. "This is a lot to process." She nodded understandingly. "Take all the time you need. Just don't shut me out, okay?" Sometimes, avoiding the truth only makes it harder to ignore. Over the next few weeks, Ademola threw himself into his studies, using academics as a distraction from the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside him. Whenever Jabari brought up their conversation, he deflected, claiming he needed more time to sort through his feelings. Truthfully, he was scared, not just of what pursuing a relationship with her might mean, but also of confronting the deeper questions it raised about himself. One Saturday afternoon, as they sat together in a quiet cafe near campus, Jabari broached a topic that had long intrigued him. "You know, Mola, you keep talking about swimming every weekend," she said lightly. "Why don't you teach me sometime?" Ademola hesitated. Swimming was his escape, a solitary activity where he could clear his head and recharge. Inviting someone else into that space felt invasive, especially given the unresolved tension between them. "I don't know," he hedged. "Swimming isn't really your thing, is it?" "It could be," she countered playfully. "Besides, I trust you. If anyone can teach me, it's you." Her persistence wore him down, and eventually, he agreed to meet her at the pool the following weekend. True to form, however, Jabari backed out at the last minute, citing discomfort with water. Ademola let it slide, chalking it up to nerves, but a nagging suspicion lingered. Why did she insist on learning, only to avoid it entirely? The pattern repeated itself several times over the coming weeks. Each time Jabari suggested swimming lessons, she found an excuse not to follow through. Ademola began to notice other things too. How she stiffened whenever his hands wandered too close during hugs, how she subtly shifted positions when they sat side by side. These behaviors weren't new, but now they carried a weight they hadn't before. One evening, as they strolled through a park after dinner, Jabari stopped abruptly. "Mola, there's something I need to tell you," she said, her voice unusually serious. "But I want to do it here. In the open air where we can both breathe. His stomach dropped. Whatever she was about to say, it was big. Okay, he replied cautiously. What is it? She took a deep breath, her gaze fixed on the horizon. I'm different, Mola. Different in ways you might not expect. Her words sent a chill down his spine. Different how? His mind raced with possibilities, none of which prepared him for the bombshell she was about to drop. Truth has a way of shattering illusions, leaving behind fragments that take time to piece back together. The park was quiet, save for the rustling leaves and distant chirping of birds. Ademola's heart pounded as he waited for Jabari to continue. Whatever she was about to say, it clearly weighed heavily on her. He braced himself, unsure if he was ready for what was coming. I'm different, Mola, she repeated, her voice trembling slightly. Different in ways you might not expect. Ademola swallowed hard. What do you mean, Jab? She hesitated, her eyes searching his face as though gauging his readiness. Finally, she exhaled sharply and said, Have you ever heard of the LGBTQ community? He nodded slowly, his mind racing. As a shy Christian boy raised in a strict household, his knowledge of such topics was limited at best. All he knew was that it involved people who identified differently from societal norms, homosexuals, transgender individuals, and others whose lives deviated from traditional expectations. But what did this have to do with Jabari? Mola, she began again, her voice softer now. Who do you see when you look at me? My beautiful friend Jabari, he replied without hesitation. It was true. She had always been exactly that to him. Radiant, kind, and undeniably feminine in every way he understood femininity. She smiled faintly, but there was sadness in her eyes. That's how I feel too, Mola. Everything about me screams female. The way I dress, my voice, even my hormones. But I wasn't born that way. Ademola blinked, struggling to process her words. What are you saying? I was born male, Mola, she confessed, tears welling up in her eyes. I have male genitals, but everything else about me is female. My identity, my soul, they've always been this way. Growing up, I never felt like a boy. I fought against it for years, trying to fit into a mold that wasn't mine. But eventually, I accepted who I am, a woman trapped in a body that doesn't fully align with who I am inside. Her revelation hit him like a tidal wave, knocking the air out of his lungs. For a moment, all he could do was stare at her, his mind reeling. How could this be possible? She looked, sounded, and acted like any other woman he knew. How could she have been born male? But your breasts, he stammered finally, grasping at straws. How? They're real, she explained gently. My body naturally produces estrogen, which allowed them to develop. It's rare, but it happens. That's why I don't wear makeup or try to change my appearance. I don't need to. This is me, Mola. The real me. Her honesty was both heartbreaking and awe-inspiring. Here she was, bearing her soul to him, trusting him with a truth that must have taken immense courage to share. Yet, despite her vulnerability, Ademola couldn't help but feel overwhelmed. What did this mean for them? For him? I need some time, he managed to choke out, backing away instinctively. I need to think. Jabari nodded, her expression resigned but understanding. Course, Mola. Take all the time you need. Just know that I'll always care about you no matter what. With that, she turned and walked away, leaving him standing alone in the park. His world irrevocably changed. Sometimes fear drives us to flee, but running only delays the inevitable. Ademola didn't remember walking home that night. One moment, he was standing in the park, reeling from Jabari's confession. The next, he found himself lying on his bed, staring blankly at the ceiling. His thoughts were a chaotic jumble, each question leading to another without resolution. Was Jabari still a woman if she had been born male? Did loving her make him gay? What would his family think if they ever found out? The weight of these questions crushed him, suffocating him under layers of guilt and confusion. He felt torn between two opposing forces, the love he felt for Jabari and the ingrained beliefs drilled into him since childhood. In his heart, he knew she was the same person she'd always been. The same caring, intelligent, beautiful woman who had become his closest friend. But his mind refused to reconcile that image with the reality she had revealed. Unable to face her, or himself, he avoided Jabari for the rest of the week. He skipped their usual subway rides, ducked out of classes early, and ignored her text messages. Each attempt to reach out went unanswered, until finally, she stopped trying altogether. Part of him hated himself for shutting her out, but he convinced himself it was necessary. He needed space to sort through his feelings, to figure out where he stood. But avoidance only made things worse. Without Jabari's presence to anchor him, Ademola spiraled into self-doubt. He questioned everything: his identity, his values, his future. At night, he lay awake, haunted by visions of her tear-streaked face as she walked away from him in the park. Had he hurt her irreparably? Would she ever forgive him? By the end of the week, he realized he couldn't keep running. No matter how painful or uncomfortable the truth was, he owed it to Jabari, and to himself, to confront it head-on. With trembling fingers, he picked up his phone and sent her a message. "Can we talk?" Her reply came almost instantly. "Whenever you're ready." Confrontation is never easy, but it's often the first step toward understanding. Ademola arrived at Jabari's apartment the following evening. His nerves stretched taut like a bowstring. He had spent the entire day rehearsing what he would say, yet now that he stood outside her door, all his carefully crafted words evaporated into thin air. What could he possibly say to make this right? To bridge the chasm his silence had created? Jabari opened the door before he could knock, her expression unreadable. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, the weight of unspoken emotions hanging heavy between them. Then, without a word, she stepped aside, gesturing for him to come in. Her apartment was warm and inviting, just as he remembered from her birthday party. The soft glow of fairy lights illuminated the room, casting gentle shadows on the walls. Ademola perched awkwardly on the edge of her couch, his hands clasped tightly together to stop them from trembling. "I'm sorry," he blurted out finally, breaking the suffocating silence. "I shouldn't have run away like that. It wasn't fair to you." Jabari sat down across from him, her posture relaxed but her eyes wary. "It's okay, Mola. Get it. This isn't something most people are prepared to hear. But that doesn't excuse how I acted," he insisted, his voice cracking with emotion. "You trusted me enough to share something so personal, and I let my fear get in the way. That wasn't fair to you, or to us." She studied him for a long moment, her gaze piercing yet compassionate. "Do you want to talk about it? About how you're feeling?" Ademola hesitated, unsure where to begin. How could he articulate the storm raging inside him? The guilt, the confusion, the lingering doubts. Finally, he settled on the simplest truth. "I don't know who I am anymore," he admitted quietly. "Before, I thought I knew what love meant, what being attracted to someone meant. But now, everything feels upside down." Jabari nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. "That's normal, Mola. Discovering something new about someone you care about can shake your foundation. But here's the thing. Nothing has changed about who I am. I'm still the same person you laughed with, studied with, danced with. The only difference is that now you know more about my journey." Her words resonated deeply, cutting through some of the fog clouding his mind. She was right, she hadn't changed. Only his perception of her had shifted. And perhaps that was the root of his struggle. "What does this mean for me?" he asked hesitantly, voicing the question that had haunted him since her confession. "If I love you, does that make me gay? Or confused? Or something else entirely?" Jabari smiled softly, reaching out to place a reassuring hand on his arm. "Love doesn't fit neatly into labels, Mola. You're not gay or straight because of who you choose to love. It's about the connection you feel. If you love me for who I am, then that's all that matters. Labels are for society, not for your heart." Her response struck a chord within him, offering a glimmer of clarity amidst the chaos. Love wasn't supposed to be confined by rigid definitions. It was fluid, evolving, and deeply personal. Perhaps the problem wasn't Jabari, or even himself, but the expectations imposed by others. "Thank you," he said finally, his voice thick with gratitude, "for being patient with me, for trusting me. I don't have all the answers yet, but I want to figure this out, with you." Jabari's smile widened, genuine warmth radiating from her eyes. "We'll figure it out together, Mola. One step at a time." Sometimes, growth requires stepping outside our comfort zones and challenging everything we thought we knew. Over the next few days, Ademola threw himself into learning more about gender identity and the LGBTQ+ community. He scoured articles online, watched documentaries, and even joined a support group for allies hosted by a local organization. Each piece of information helped chip away at the misconceptions he'd carried since childhood, replacing them with empathy and understanding. One evening, while scrolling through resources, he stumbled upon a video featuring transgender women sharing their stories. Their experiences varied widely, but one common thread ran through all of them: the courage it took to live authentically despite societal judgment. Watching them speak openly about their journeys filled him with admiration and a renewed sense of determination to stand by Jabari no matter what. When he met up with her later that week, he couldn't wait to share what he'd learned. They chose a quiet cafe near campus, its cozy ambience perfect for deep conversations. Over steaming cups of coffee, Ademola recounted everything he'd discovered, his excitement evident in his animated gestures. "I didn't realize how much misinformation I had absorbed growing up," he confessed. "But hearing these stories made me see things differently. You're not alone, Jab. There's an entire community of people fighting for acceptance and equality." Jabari listened intently, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you for doing this, Mola. Not everyone would take the time to educate themselves like you have." "It's the least I can do," he replied earnestly. "After everything you've shared with me, I owe it to you, and to myself, to understand." Their conversation flowed effortlessly after that, touching on lighter topics like upcoming exams and weekend plans. For the first time in weeks, Ademola felt a sense of normalcy returning to their relationship. Yet beneath the surface, he knew they were navigating uncharted territory, one that required patience, communication, and mutual respect. As they walked back to the train station later that evening, Jabari slipped her hand into his, a small gesture that spoke volumes. Ademola hesitated for a fraction of a second before lacing his fingers through hers, his heart swelling with affection. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he was ready to face them together. Family shapes us in ways we don't always realize, but sometimes, breaking free is the only way to grow. As Ademola's relationship with Jabari deepened, he couldn't ignore the looming shadow of his family. Raised in a strict Christian household in Nigeria, he had been taught that love existed within very specific boundaries that left no room for deviation. His parents were loving but traditional, their values rooted in faith and cultural expectations. How would they react if they discovered he was dating someone like Jabari? Would they disown him? Or worse, condemn her? The thought terrified him. Yet, as much as he feared their judgment, he also knew he couldn't hide forever. Love wasn't something you could tuck away neatly. It demanded acknowledgement, even when the cost felt unbearable. One evening, after another day of research and reflection, Ademola decided to broach the subject with his older sister, Ngozi, during one of their weekly video calls. She was the most open-minded member of the family, often challenging their parents' rigid views while still respecting their beliefs. If anyone could offer guidance, or at least a listening ear, it was her. "Ngozi," he began hesitantly, fidgeting with the hem of his shirt. "Can I ask you something personal?" She raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Course, Mola. What's on your mind?" He took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "What would you think if I told you I'm seeing someone who doesn't fit into what Mom and Dad consider normal?" Her expression softened immediately. "Are you happy with this person?" she asked gently. Yes, he replied without hesitation. More than I've ever been. Then that's all that matters, she said firmly. Love isn't about fitting into boxes, Mola. It's about finding someone who makes your life better. If this person does that for you, then I support you completely. Her response brought tears to his eyes. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine a future where his happiness wasn't dictated by fear or obligation. But even as hope flickered within him, doubt lingered. Ngozi might accept him, but what about the rest of the family? I just don't know how to tell them, he admitted quietly. They've always had such clear ideas about how my life should look. Ngozi sighed, her tone sympathetic yet resolute. It won't be easy, Mola. But remember this. You're not responsible for their reactions. All you can do is stay true to yourself. And trust that real love will find its way through any storm. Her words stayed with him long after their call ended, echoing in his mind like a mantra. Staying true to himself sounded simple enough, but putting it into practice felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, unsure whether the leap would lead to freedom or ruin. Change begins with small steps, even when those steps feel monumental. Determined to honor his feelings for Jabari while navigating the complexities of his upbringing, Ademola decided to take things slowly. He began introducing subtle changes into his interactions with his family, testing the waters without revealing too much too soon. During phone calls home, he started talking more openly about LGBTQ+ topics, framing them as academic interests rather than personal ones. I read this article about gender identity today. He mentioned casually during one conversation with his mother. Did you know there are people who identify differently from the sex they were assigned at birth? His mother's reaction was predictable, a mix of discomfort and dismissal. These things are unnatural, Mola, she said firmly. God created men and women for a reason. Anything else goes against his plan. Her words stung, but Ademola didn't argue. Instead, he nodded politely and changed the subject, filing her response away as further evidence of the uphill battle ahead. Still, he refused to let her perspective define his path. He owed it to Jabari and to himself to keep moving forward no matter how daunting the journey seemed. Meanwhile, his bond with Jabari continued to flourish. They spent more time together, exploring London's vibrant neighborhoods and sharing intimate conversations late into the night. Each moment reinforced his certainty that she was exactly who he wanted to be with, not despite her identity, but because of it. Her authenticity inspired him to embrace his own truth, even when it felt terrifying. One weekend, Jabari invited him to attend a pride event in the city. It's okay if you're not ready, she assured him when he hesitated. But I'd love for you to come. Seeing the community firsthand might help you understand why this matters so much to me. Ademola wrestled with the decision for days, torn between excitement and apprehension. Attending the event meant stepping fully into Jabari's world, a world that challenged everything he'd grown up believing. Yet, wasn't that precisely what love required? To meet someone halfway, even when it meant leaving familiar ground behind. Finally, he made up his mind. I'll go, he told her, his voice steady despite the butterflies in his stomach. Let's do it together. Jabari's smile lit up the room, her joy palpable. You won't regret it, Mola. I promise. Sometimes, stepping into someone else's world reveals truths you never expected to find. The day of the Pride event arrived, and Ademola felt a mix of anticipation and anxiety as he and Jabari made their way to the bustling streets of central London. The atmosphere was electric, filled with vibrant colors, infectious laughter, and an overwhelming sense of unity. Rainbow flags fluttered in the breeze, while music pulsed through speakers set up along the parade route. For the first time, Ademola found himself surrounded by people unapologetically celebrating who they were. And it was beautiful. Jabari seemed to glow with pride, her usual confidence amplified by the energy around them. She introduced him to friends she'd met through various LGBTQ+ groups, each greeting warm and welcoming. Ademola marveled at how effortlessly she navigated this world, a world so different from the one he had grown up in. Yet, instead of feeling out of place, he felt included, as though he too belonged here alongside her. As they walked together, hand in hand, Jabari leaned in and whispered, "How are you feeling?" "Overwhelmed," he admitted honestly, "but in a good way. Seeing all these people living authentically. It makes me realize how much courage it takes." She squeezed his hand, her smile radiant. "It does take courage, but also love. Love for yourself, and love from others who accept you for who you are." Her words resonated deeply, cutting through lingering doubts he hadn't fully acknowledged. Growing up, he had been taught to view the LGBTQ+ community through a lens of judgment and fear. But now, standing amidst its vibrancy and resilience, he saw only strength and authenticity. How could something so full of life and joy be wrong? Later that afternoon, they joined a march led by transgender activists advocating for equality and acceptance. Ademola listened intently as speakers shared their stories. Stories of struggle, triumph, and unwavering hope. One speaker, a young trans woman named Amina, recounted her journey of self-discovery and the challenges she faced within her conservative family. Her words struck a chord with Ademola, reminding him of his own fears about coming out to his parents. "I know what it's like to feel torn between two worlds," Amina said passionately. "But I've learned that staying true to yourself is worth every sacrifice. Because when you embrace your truth, you give others permission to do the same." By the end of the day, Ademola felt transformed. The Pride event wasn't just a celebration. It was a revelation. It challenged everything he thought he knew about identity, love, and belonging, and left him more determined than ever to stand by Jabari, no matter the cost. True growth begins when we confront our own reflection and choose to change. The days following the Pride event were a whirlwind of introspection for Ademola. He couldn't stop thinking about the stories he'd heard, the faces he'd seen, and the overwhelming sense of community that had enveloped him. Each memory reinforced the realization that love transcended labels and boundaries. It was about connection, understanding, and mutual respect. Yet, despite the clarity he gained, old fears still lingered. His upbringing clung to him like a second skin, whispering doubts whenever he let his guard down. Could he truly reconcile his faith with his feelings for Jabari? Would embracing their relationship mean abandoning the values instilled in him since childhood? One evening, unable to sleep, Ademola sat in front of his laptop and began typing a letter to his future self. Writing had always been his way of processing emotions, and tonight, he needed answers only he could provide. "Dear future me, if you're reading this, it means you've reached a crossroads. A moment where the person you want to be clashes with the person you were raised to be. I know how scary that feels. Change is terrifying, especially when it challenges everything you've ever known. But remember this. Love isn't a sin. Loving Jabari doesn't make you less of a Christian or less of a man. Makes you human. And being human means growing, evolving, and learning to see the world, and yourself through new eyes. Yes, there will be sacrifices. Yes, some people may not understand. But if you stay silent, if you hide who you are and who you love, you'll lose something far greater. Your integrity. Your truth. And isn't that worth fighting for? So whatever happens next, promise me this. Don't let fear dictate your choices. Stand by Jabari because she deserves nothing less than your whole heart. And stand by yourself because you deserve happiness too. You've got this. Present you. When he finished writing, tears streamed down his face. For the first time, he allowed himself to fully acknowledge the weight of his decision, and the freedom it promised. Love wasn't about perfection. It was about effort, vulnerability, and trust. And if he wanted a future with Jabari, he had to start trusting himself. The next morning, he woke up with renewed resolve. He messaged Jabari. "Let's talk tonight. There's something important I need to say." Her reply came quickly. "I'll be waiting." Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing to act despite it. That evening, Ademola met Jabari at their favorite park, the same place where she had first confessed her truth to him. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of autumn leaves, and the golden hues of sunset bathed the landscape in warmth. As he approached, he saw her sitting on a bench, her silhouette framed by the fading light. She looked up as he neared, her expression calm but tinged with anticipation. "Hey," she greeted softly, patting the space beside her. Ademola sat down, his heart pounding. He had rehearsed this moment countless times in his head, yet now that it was here, the words felt heavy, almost impossible to articulate. Still, he knew he couldn't hold back any longer. This was the moment of truth, for both of them. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he began, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "About us, about me, about everything." Jabari nodded encouragingly, her eyes locked onto his. And I've realized something important," he continued, taking a deep breath. "I can't keep running from who I am, or who we are together. Loving you, it doesn't make me less of who I thought I was. Makes me more honest, more brave, more alive." Tears welled up in Jabari's eyes, but she didn't interrupt. Instead, she reached out and took his hand, her touch grounding him. "I know my family won't understand. At least not right away," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "And maybe some people will judge us. But none of that matters anymore. What matters is how I feel about you. And I love you, Jab. Completely. Unconditionally. No matter what." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The world seemed to pause, holding its breath as the weight of his confession settled between them. Then Jabari leaned forward, pulling him into a tight embrace. "You have no idea how much those words mean to me," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Thank you for trusting me enough to say them." They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms as the sun dipped below the horizon. For Ademola, it felt like stepping into a new chapter, not just in their relationship but in his life. He had finally chosen love over fear, authenticity over conformity. And though the road ahead would undoubtedly be challenging, he knew they would face it together. Sometimes, the hardest conversations lead to the most profound growth. The next few days passed in a blur of quiet preparation. Ademola knew he couldn't delay telling his family any longer. Every call home felt heavier than the last, weighed down by the secret he carried. Yet he also understood that honesty, even painful honesty, was the foundation of trust. If he wanted his family to accept him, he had to start by being truthful. He decided to speak with Ngozi first, knowing she would be his ally in navigating the inevitable fallout. During their weekly video call, he explained everything: the depth of his feelings for Jabari, the Pride event, and his decision to fully embrace their relationship. To his relief, Ngozi listened without judgment, offering support and encouragement. "You're doing the right thing, Mola," she said firmly. "It won't be easy, but staying true to yourself is always worth it. Let me handle Mom and Dad when the time comes. I'll help them understand." Her reassurance gave him the courage to take the next step. A few days later, he called his parents, requesting a family meeting over video chat. When everyone gathered, their expectant faces staring back at him from the screen, Ademola took a deep breath and began. "There's something I need to tell you all," he said, his voice steady despite the knot in his stomach. "Something that's been weighing on me for a while now." His mother frowned slightly, her concern evident. "What is it, Mola? Are you okay?" "I'm fine," he replied quickly. "But there's something about my life that I haven't shared with you before. Something important." He paused, gathering his thoughts, then plunged ahead. "I'm in a relationship with someone amazing. Her name is Jabari, and she's one of the kindest, most genuine people I've ever met. We care deeply about each other, and I want you to know her someday." His father's expression darkened immediately. "Is this person Christian?" he asked cautiously. Ademola hesitated, knowing the answer would complicate things further. "Yes, she believes in God," he said carefully. "But there's something else you should know. Jabari is transgender. She was assigned male at birth, but she identifies as female, and has since she was very young." Silence followed his words, heavy and suffocating. His mother's face paled, while his father's jaw tightened visibly. Finally, his father spoke, his tone sharp and disapproving. "This is unacceptable, Mola. Such behavior goes against our faith and our culture. You must end this relationship immediately." "No, Dad," Ademola replied firmly, surprising even himself with his conviction. "I won't do that. I love Jabari, and I won't let anyone, including you, dictate who I choose to love. If you can't accept that, then I'll have to find my own path." The tension crackled through the screen, but Ademola refused to back down. For once, he stood his ground, unyielding in his resolve. Though the conversation ended abruptly, with his parents retreating into stunned silence, he felt a strange sense of peace. He had spoken his truth, and nothing could take that away from him. Family ties can be both a source of strength and a test of resilience. The days following Ademola's revelation to his parents were some of the hardest he had ever faced. His father refused to speak to him, responding only through terse texts demanding that he reconsider his choices. His mother, though more empathetic, struggled to reconcile her love for her son with her deeply ingrained beliefs. She called him repeatedly, pleading for him to pray about it and seek guidance from the church. Each conversation left Ademola emotionally drained, but he refused to waver. He leaned heavily on Ngozi, who became his lifeline during this turbulent time. She checked in daily, offering words of encouragement and reminding him that healing took time, even within families. "Mom and Dad will come around eventually," she assured him during one particularly difficult call. "They just need time to process. In the meantime, focus on what makes you happy. That's all that matters." Jabari, too, stood by him unwaveringly. She listened patiently as he vented his frustrations, never pressuring him to share more than he was ready to. Instead, she filled their days with small acts of kindness, cooking his favorite meals, surprising him with handwritten notes, and simply being present when he needed her most. One evening, as they sat together in her apartment, Ademola voiced a fear that had been gnawing at him. "What if they never accept us?" he asked quietly, his voice tinged with sadness. "What if I've lost them forever?" Jabari placed a comforting hand on his knee. "I wish I could promise you that everything will work out perfectly," she said gently. "But the truth is, we can't control how others react. All we can do is stay true to ourselves, and hope that love wins in the end." Her words resonated deeply, grounding him in the present moment. No matter what happened with his family, he knew he had made the right decision. Love wasn't about seeking approval. It was about embracing authenticity and choosing joy over judgment. Sometimes, the family we choose becomes the family we need. As tensions with his biological family simmered, Ademola found solace in an unexpected place: the LGBTQ+ community Jabari had introduced him to. Over the weeks, he attended support group meetings, joined online forums, and even volunteered at a local organization advocating for transgender rights. Each interaction reinforced the realization that he wasn't alone, that countless others had walked similar paths and emerged stronger for it. Through these experiences, Ademola began to see his situation in a new light. Yes, his relationship with his parents was strained, but he was building something equally meaningful: a chosen family. Ngozi remained his steadfast ally, while Jabari's friends welcomed him with open arms, treating him like one of their own. For the first time, he understood the power of community, not just as a source of support, but as a reminder that love comes in many forms. One Saturday afternoon, Jabari invited him to a picnic organized by a local LGBTQ+ advocacy group. The event was held in a sprawling park, its lush greenery dotted with colorful blankets and laughter-filled conversations. As they mingled with attendees, Ademola noticed how effortlessly Jabari connected with everyone, her warmth and charisma drawing people in. "This is amazing," he murmured to her as they sat side by side, watching a spirited game of frisbee unfold nearby. "I've never felt so accepted." She smiled, her eyes shining with pride. That's what happens when you surround yourself with people who celebrate who you are instead of trying to change you. Later that day, during a heartfelt speech by one of the organizers, Ademola realized something profound. Acceptance wasn't something you waited for. It was something you created. By standing by Jabari and embracing their relationship, he had taken the first step toward forging a life rooted in love and authenticity. And though the road ahead would undoubtedly have its challenges, he now knew he had the tools and the people to navigate it. Love isn't about finding perfection. It's about creating a future worth fighting for. Months passed, and while Ademola's relationship with his parents remained strained, glimmers of progress began to emerge. His mother, unable to stay away from her son entirely, started sending longer messages, asking questions about Jabari and expressing cautious curiosity. Though her tone was still tinged with uncertainty, Ademola recognized it as a step forward, a sign that love, however flawed, could bridge even the widest divides. His father, on the other hand, remained distant, retreating into silence whenever Ademola tried to reach out. It hurt, but Ademola refused to let bitterness take root. Instead, he focused on nurturing the relationships that brought him joy. His bond with Ngozi, his growing connection with Jabari's friends, and, above all, his partnership with Jabari herself. Their love had deepened over time, evolving into something richer and more resilient. They celebrated milestones together: Jabari's graduation, Ademola's academic achievements, and quiet moments of everyday happiness that reminded them why they had chosen each other in the first place. Together, they dreamed of a future where societal expectations no longer dictated their choices, a future built on mutual respect, understanding, and unwavering support. One crisp winter evening, as they strolled hand in hand through the streets of London, Jabari turned to him with a mischievous grin. "Do you remember the first time we met? On that subway train?" Ademola chuckled, squeezing her hand. "How could I forget? You were sitting across from me, looking far too beautiful to ignore." "Well," she teased, "you didn't seem so interested back then. Just another guy stuck in his routine." "I may have been stuck in my routine," he admitted, pulling her closer, "but meeting you changed everything. You showed me that love doesn't fit into neat little boxes, and that sometimes breaking free is the best thing you can do." Jabari's smile softened, her eyes glistening with emotion. "And you showed me that love is worth fighting for, even when the odds feel impossible." As they kissed beneath the glow of streetlights, surrounded by the hum of the city they now called home, Ademola felt a profound sense of peace. Their journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth every step. Love, he realized, wasn't about finding perfection. It was about choosing to grow together despite imperfections. And in that moment, standing beside the woman he loved, Ademola knew they had created something extraordinary, a love strong enough to withstand any storm.